Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. My name is Sarah and welcome to What the Horror, the channel where we talk about horror movies old and new. Today we're talking about and taking a deep dive into the 2012 supernatural horror film Sinister. Sinister was directed by Scott Derrickson and co-written by Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill. Derrickson has also directed The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Doctor Strange and 2021's The Black Phone. While Cargill has also written Sinister 2, Doctor Strange and the screenplay adaptation of The Black Phone. Sinister was filmed on a budget of $3 million and made $87.7 million at the box office. The concept of and inspiration for Sinister came from C. Robert Cargill. He'd woken one night from a nightmare he'd had after watching The Ring. The dream consisted of Cargill going into his attic and finding a film of a family being hung from a tree in a garden. This would be the starting block for the whole story and the very opening scene of the film. Also, I just have to say it, The Ring yet again responsible for so many nightmares, trauma and inspiration in the horror genre. I just don't seem to be able to get away from this film at the moment. It's a bloody good movie. Sinister was for the most part received positively by audiences and critics. Most critics praised the acting, direction and cinematography, but had issues with what was considered an over-reliance on jump scares and other horror tropes. Despite this, however, Sinister has been described as an undeniably scary movie and has appeared on many scariest movie moments lists. If you've seen the film, then you probably know the moment, the lawnmower one. Yeah, scary the first time you see it, right? So today we're going to dig a little deeper into the horror of Sinister and some different ways of reading it. Before we get going, just a heads up that this episode will include spoilers, so just bear that in mind if you haven't seen the film yet. So, Sinister is labelled as a supernatural horror film, but to me, Sinister is far more of a blend. Yes, there is certainly the supernatural element to it, a family being haunted in their home, strange occurrences, ghostly children and mysterious films. But you could say that there is a tiny bit of monster movie to it as well, with the film's antagonist Bughuul. And I would also say a little bit of whodunit and psychological thriller in terms of the mystery surrounding the films and the murders. The movie follows the Oswalt family as they move into a new house in the fictional town of Chatford, Pennsylvania. Ellison Oswalt is a true crime writer who had a successful book 10 years ago and is hoping to recreate that success with his new book, covering a family murder that happened in town. What he doesn't tell his wife and two children is that the house they moved into is actually the house where the murders were committed, and while the family try to settle into their new lives, it becomes clear that something is very wrong in the house. Ellison discovers a box of Super 8 films in the attic, all depicting the murders of families over the past decades, dating back to the 1960s. Ellison, feeling sure he's onto something big, ignores his family's pleas to return to their hometown and begins investigating into the murders. While the tapes seem to show the work of a prolific serial killer, Ellison discovers there is actually a pagan deity at the heart of them, the film's antagonist, Bughuul. If you are interested in finding out more about Bughuul, then you can check out my Monsters 101 episode I did, which is dedicated to Bughuul and chock full of information, and which I will leave a link to here and in the description box below. At face value, the concept for Sinister is an interesting one. While there are plenty of dark horror movies out there, and more still, that tell a story of children being targeted and or possessed by an evil force, we rarely see such a hopeless and bleak ending as the ending of Sinister. One concerning children, one in which innocence is lost, and one where the bad guy wins. Sinister often gets accused of the overuse of jump scares. Jump scares are not for everyone and are sometimes considered a cheap scare. And yes, there are jump scares aplenty in Sinister, and one in particular which I'm not the biggest fan of, which isn't helped by the fact that they then use it twice in the film. However, jump scares aside, there is plenty of genuine horror to be found within Sinister. I mean, where do you start? First of all, you have families being murdered by their own children whose souls have been corrupted, and so have no feeling of remorse. We see evidence of this when one of the children, Stephanie, pulls on her parents' legs and swings around having fun after having just killed them. The idea of it being children targeted and manipulated by some unseen force is tapping into parents' worst fears. Children are our innocence and we want to protect them. In Sinister, we are neither able to protect them or apparently even be aware that they need protecting. Although, just a little caveat to that, Bughuul does seem to target emotionally vulnerable children. But even if the parents were engaged, switched on, it ultimately doesn't matter, which leads me to my favourite aspect of the horror to be found in Sinister, and that is the tragic inevitability of it all. The Oswalt's fate is inescapable as soon as they move into that house. No good intention, no act of bravery, no character growth or lesson learnt will prevent what is to happen. One other way to interpretate Sinister, is that Ellison Oswalt is in fact the villain of the story, and the story is a cautionary tale. Don't neglect your family. Ellison Oswalt is our protagonist, our lead character, and who we journey through the film with. But on this most recent watch of Sinister, it became very clear that Ellison is at the very least an anti-hero, and actually very likely the villain of the story. He is, after all, responsible for everything that happens to his family. Ellison is highly flawed as a person, and it's interesting that we see so much of his character in the opening scenes of the film. We learn he's the one making the decisions as the family have moved because of him. We learn that he's a very proud person, so much so that it causes problems for his family. Ellison's pride means he instantly starts off on the wrong foot with the town's sheriff. When the sheriff attacks what Ellison does for a living, and more specifically his writing, it hits a nerve. Instead of seeing the situation for what it is, a town healing from a tragic murder, Ellison is affronted. And after a comment from his wife about not wanting to be pulled for a speeding ticket when driving under the limit, it's clear that Ellison's pride has caused issues for the family in previous towns. We also learn that Ellison is a liar. He moves the family into the house where the murders were committed, but conceals this information. When his wife asks him, "Did we move down the street from the murder house?" he says no. Which technically isn't a lie, but it is the perfect opportunity to tell the truth. Which he doesn't. We see later that he's arrogant. Ellison is very dismissive of Deputy So-and-so and his offers of help and obvious intelligence in the investigative field. You know, seeing as how he's a professional cop. Apparently Ellison solving the Kentucky blood case gives him some sort of superiority. Later on in the film, we watch as Ellison revisits the glory days of the success of Kentucky Blood by watching old interviews on VHS tapes. We hear the interviewer ask past Ellison why he spends time investigating such grisly content. I mean, yeah, right? To which past Ellison jokingly replies, "Fame and money." But perhaps this is the most honest we see Ellison in the runtime of the movie. Or perhaps we are seeing the younger, hopeful Ellison foreshadow the writer he would become. The driving force of everything Ellison does in the film is his writing. It's finding the story, solving the crime, and having a successfully published true crime book which makes a lot of money. This is what Ellison has been chasing since he released Kentucky Blood, his first true crime book. Threaded throughout the film are plenty of examples of how this isn't just a job for Ellison, but an obsession, and a dangerous one at that. Consider, when Ellison discovers the films in the attic, watches them and realises these are footage of murders, he calls the police to report them, but as he's on the phone, he sees copies of Kentucky Blood and decides to hang up. As far as he knows, what he's discovered could help solve these cases and potentially find the killer. Yet he prioritises his book over giving the police important evidence. You could also question why, when he discovers his family is in danger, he chooses not to leave. You know, outside of being a character in a horror movie. Well, we know that his writing is an obsession, and on their first night in the murder house, Ellison's wife spells it out to him that this is the last time. If this one doesn't work out, then she's taking the kids with her and moving back to her sister's. So this is it for Ellison. All or nothing. But it's important to mention that it is also his own safety which he's okay with risking, even when he sees footage of ghostly hands pulling him down through the attic floor, proof of the supernatural. He doesn't stop. As I said earlier, what if Sinister is actually a cautionary tale against the consequences of neglecting your family and prioritising your work over them? And it is here that Ellison's true villainy is found, in his relationship with his family, or lack thereof. To me, Ellison is the villain of Sinister because he is the cause of everything that happens. Yes, sure, Bughuul is the one who targets and manipulates the family and ultimately claims the soul of Ellison's daughter. However, Bughuul wouldn't have been able to do this if it weren't for Ellison's choices. From the very opening of the film, it is clear to the audience that Ellison's children did not want to move. In fact, Ellison has a conversation with his daughter where she plainly says she didn't want to leave her school and her friends. This is her telling Ellison, her father, how she feels, how this move has made her feel. Ellison's response to this is to become defensive, claiming he couldn't write at home and she knows he needs to write. Right? He is choosing his work over his children's happiness. There's an interesting scene at the dinner table on the Oswalt's first night in the murder house. The son, Trevor, asks to be taken to the scene of the murders Ellison is investigating. But he's only young, he's only 12, and his mother obviously doesn't want this. So she says no, that, quote, he's not old enough. She even adds, to soften the blow, I'm not old enough, and tries to explain why she's saying no. That is called good parenting. Now at this point, Ellison hasn't gotten involved until his wife says, your father writes about terrible things. Ellison then speaks up, becoming defensive, not about the welfare of his son, but about his writing. This is a perfect example showing us the difference in parents and how Ellison prioritises work over family. Ellison's wife spells it out to him on the first night in the house. She says that the kids are growing up and he is missing out on time with them that he can't get back. Ellison is an emotionally absent father. He's oblivious to his children's needs, or perhaps is aware, but either way, they're not a priority over the work. We see little snippets of the emotional and physical separation between the family unit. Ellison doesn't kiss the children goodnight at bedtime. We can see from the half-eaten meal on his desk that he doesn't join them for family meals. And when his daughter Ashley makes him a cup of coffee and delivers it to his office, Ellison accepts it and closes the door on her to answer a work call. The door is a literal physical representation of the barrier between them. One of the worst examples of Ellison's neglect, or actually maybe that should be one of the best examples of Ellison's neglect of his family's needs, is seen with his son Trevor. Very soon after the family move into the murder house, Trevor begins having night terrors again, which become increasingly worse, ending in him being at physical risk. When Ellison's wife Tracy begs, almost pleads with Ellison for them to leave the house for the sake of their son's mental health, he refuses. I mean, if that were me, I'd just leave and take the kids anyway, but hey. It all comes to a head when Tracy finally finds out that they are living in the murder house and confronts Ellison. Now Ellison, the weasel that he is, wait for it, actually blames his lies and deception on Tracy. That's right, he says it was she who had told him she didn't want to know. But this is referencing when she had asked him had they moved down the street from the murder house. This guy is a class act. Tracy nails it when she tells Ellison that there is, quote, clearly nothing he won't do for his book, even at the expense of his family's safety. Ellison explains to his wife of many years and mother of his children that his books are the only thing that give his life meaning, that they're his legacy. Ellison has made his children's lives unstable by moving them from town to town. He has ignored their emotional well-being. He doesn't provide any fatherly support after they've moved, gaslights his wife, and puts them in harm's way. All of this neglect is rooted in his obsession with and prioritising his work over them. It's tragic that the Oswalt's family's fate is to perish at the hands of Bughuul's curse, that Ellison's actions have led them to this end. But the real tragedy is found retrospectively when we learn that their fate was inescapable from the moment they moved into the house. This means that Ellison was never going to be able to find redemption for his choices. Even when he realises that his work has put his family in real danger and tries to remove them from it, it's too late. The damage of his choices and actions is already done. But while it was too late for Ellison to save his family and himself, once he realised what was actually important, he did ultimately get what he wanted. Those chilling lines of dialogue from Ashley.
Don't worry, Daddy. I'll make you famous again.
Even in her possessed state, Ashley is fully aware of what her father really wanted, what really mattered to him. And this is the last thing he hears. His last moments on Earth are him being faced with the realisation that he is as much to blame for the current situation as Bughuul is. And Ellison, in his murder, gets the fame and recognition that he was looking for. If you're still on the fence as to whether Ellison is a villain, then I want to share one last thought with you. What's interesting about Ellison's collection of interview tapes he keeps hidden in a drawer is that they mirror the box of tapes kept by Bughuul. In fact, there are some more mirroring similarities between the two. Consider the fact that Bughuul won't stop until he achieves his goal of consuming a corrupted child's soul, while Ellison won't stop until he reclaims the fame and fortune of his glory days. Neither of them considering the family who end up as collateral damage in the process. Two sides of the same coin, the protagonist and antagonist. I can't help but wonder though if there is another message in the film's story. There is a large number of people who find enjoyment in, or at least have an interest in, true crime. Me included. It's the psychology. I find it fascinating, the why behind things and what people do. I mean, it's what shapes this channel, the history and psychology behind the films and the horror within. So is Sinister a commentary on our, or some of our, I should say, fascination with true crime? Is there a moral question to our enjoyment of true crime? Sinister seems to think so. Consider the sheriff's attitude towards Ellison and his books when they first meet. The sheriff accuses Ellison of being unkind towards the police force, not taking their work seriously. He also points out that while Ellison's theories on the Kentucky blood case were correct, his bad theory and amateur investigations on another case allowed the killer to go free. The sheriff appears to have disdain for Ellison's profession, true crime writer, and he claims Ellison and his books ruin lives and create a circus show out of people's tragedy. He makes it very clear he's not happy that Ellison has moved to town to write about the murders that occurred there, and is basically asking Ellison to not write about it, saying that the town just wants to heal. But you could say that the sheriff's disdain stretches further than Ellison. Consider the same scene but towards the end. The sheriff points at what we know is the house and says, quote, "I find all this very distasteful. But what's interesting about the shot is that we can't see the house. The house is in effect where we are. So is the sheriff pointing at the house or to the audience? I mean, we're watching the horror movie, which is more than likely going to contain murder or death, and as an audience, we are almost complicit with Ellison in his investigation into the true crime case. You can see the inspirations that came from The Ring here, because that is a film that also makes the audience complicit and what you would call an active audience. By watching Sadako's cursed tape, you are now in the same position as Asakawa and Ryuji, and in Sinister we find and watch the tapes along with Ellison. I think Sinister's opinion on true crime is clear, from the sheriff's dialogue to making the true crime writer an unlikable and potentially the villain character. Well, there you go guys, my deep dive into the horror of Sinister. I would love to know your guys' thoughts on it. Do you have any theories of your own? And what do you think about Ellison being the villain and the true crime aspect? That one a little bit of a stretch maybe? Either way, let me know down in the comments below. I'm not sure what my next episode will be. I haven't done a truly horror in about a month now, I think, so maybe it'll be another one of those, or maybe another Monster 101. You guys seem to be really enjoying that series. Don't forget to subscribe though, so you don't miss out on whatever wonders it is, and also don't forget to let me know down below any suggestions for truly horror episodes, or Monsters 101 episodes, or even movies you'd like me to take a deep dive into. But in the meantime, thank you as always for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Bye, guys.